Okay, feels like a slow gray morning. Yeah. Well, I think we've hit a pretty complex point. Like I'm guessing some of you may have found the homework a little bit more tricky. So we can go slow today, make sure we understand it. Okay, so we want to learn about basically grouping on the call. Can you guys hear me okay? Everybody good on the call?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. We're at the point where we're trying to group information together, and whenever you have data in an application, yeah, good morning. You need to be able to represent all kinds of information. So like whatever, this is typically called modeling, whatever like real world thing you're trying to model, you need to be able to model it in your code in some way. So you need to be able to like store data. So if it's a shopping cart that has items and those items have a name and a description and reviews and all the stuff you see on Amazon when you're shopping, or if you're on like a social media site and you've got your user profile and your name and your age, and then you've got all the posts that you've written and the stuff that you've liked, or you have a blog application and you have blog posts, and those posts have the title and the body, tags and comments. All those things ultimately get represented in JavaScript to be able to be seen on the page. And all that stuff requires like you can't just like do that with a bunch of variables. You have to typically group information together. And so the way that you do that is with objects and then also arrays. And objects and arrays are super dynamic. So you can sort of nest things within them as much as you want. And you'll start seeing wild things like an object that can have a property, but that property can have any type on it. Meaning like you can put a string in that property or a number in that property or undefined in that property or another array in that property or another object in that property. And then like you can just keep going. So you can have like an object that has an object that has an object that then has an array, and then that array is of objects. And that sounds kind of wild, but you'll notice like as you're starting to model things in the real world, you quickly will end up doing stuff like that. So it can be kind of wild at first, but hopefully you can if you start thinking about real world stuff, like a shopping cart is the easiest starting point, or like the blog post that I talked about. Like if you have a site that has a bunch of blog posts, that might start as an array of all the posts, because there's more than one. So you have all the posts, you have an array, and then each post is an object. And that post might have a title property and a body property, but then the comments on that post might be what? What would you add to make that?
Array.
Yeah. Yeah. So you already can see like we've got an array of objects, which are the posts, but then the post then has an array. And the comments, it could be a string of the comments, but it's probably not, because it would probably be an object that has the person that did the comment and the date they did the comment, and then the comment body itself. So you already can see array of objects with an array of objects with just that simple example. If you're still freaking out after kind of hearing that, You all have used, let me just make sure I'm not showing anything. You guys have all used Excel before. Second. Okay, so you've all used Excel before. And what you have here is like, if you just use it the straightforward way, which is here are the rows, here are the columns. And typically you end up using the first row as like the header, you know, of like what the columns are going to be. And so if you think about our shopping cart example, we might have name, it's bigger, price, description, quantity, like this. And then we would have potentially multiple shopping cart items that we can add here. So we can have, you know, dog, toy, $4.99. Two of them, and then paper towels. So, you know, we can have many items within our shopping cart. And so this simple sort of layout, what do you think, how would we represent this in JavaScript? What would this be? Morning.
Object.
Yeah, array of objects in this case. And we've seen in the homework, there was the record collection thing, and they did, there's definitely a use case for that record collection style. I don't use it as much, but it's certainly still good to know. You'll typically see people using an array of objects more often than not.
It's for like sorting, right?
The array of objects or the
Collection.
yeah, so we saw a record, the record collection was an object of objects. Which is a little it's pretty wild, but like you can have as many properties on an object as you want. And so typically you're thinking of an object as like one thing, you know, like one blog post or one shopping cart item. But you can also say, okay, like I'm gonna have one thing, but I'm gonna have the thing that's storing all of them be an object as well. And the only reason you would do that is if you want to have what's called a key to find it. And so you can basically then use like the name of the shopping cart item or some sort of, you'll hear this term like a unique ID, where you can like generate this massive thing of text that's called like a GUID, a globally unique ID. And like, so you can then like easily access that item by its name. So you can just like you guys, how do you, let's go ahead and
When I use a collection, I also use it to just sort, because you're able to sort like. And it's kind of, I don't know in JavaScript, you're able to kind of sort a list of arrays by one of the key val or one of the key sets in particular object. So that's what I primarily use a collection for.
okay. So you can sort an array. So I'll kind of show some of that. Okay. I'll loop back to what we were just talking about, but I want to go ahead and just get through like some of the basic object stuff that we need to know. So how do I make just a single object? And I want this object to be like a single shopping cart item. So we saw in this in this example here for our spreadsheet, we've got a shopping cart spreadsheet. Name, price, description, quantity are the properties on it. And I want to make this first item. I don't want to make the. So in this case, this is better represented as an array of objects. Because the key in this case is the position. It's like 1, 2, 3. So that's like similar to our index of an array. We access an array by position. The first item in the array, the second item in the array, the third item in the array, but 0, 1, 2 instead of 1, 2, 3. So if I want to make this object, how would I do that here? What's the syntax? Oh, and obviously I can't just start writing JavaScript like that unless it's in a script tag. And so that's why it wasn't coloring correctly. Like if you ever notice something's not coloring correctly, like you mess something up in terms of like, you're not doing the right language in the right place. Okay, so how do I make that first shopping cart item? Yeah, so curly brace, you see curly braces quite a bit, right? Where else have we seen them? Functions, and then we saw last class, what was the other thing we saw them in? If statements, yeah. Right, so like, because there's not a keyword function in front of this with parentheses, and there's not if or else in front of it, it knows that we're trying to make an object. Okay, good. So typically you would put, when you're defining this stuff, typically we want to be able to read it really easily. So we're adding new lines, meaning like I went from line 11 to line 12, but you don't have to do that. That's just like better for reading. There's nothing like I could define this object all on one line if I wanted to, but this is just easier to read. Okay, so I want name property. So what do I put here? Yeah, name. And it's not inside a string, right?
Well,
Yeah.
but
No, we don't have to do that.
because it's a single.
Yes, yeah, and you pretty much are always going to use single words, and you'll use camel casing just like your variable names. Yeah, but yeah, you could have spaces if you put it in quotes. Yeah.
It is a string, right? They just take it away if it's unnecessary. Like you could put quotes name there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I think it is a string. It's just like the editor wants to just reduce the amount of clutter, so they just default take that away.
Okay, and then what do I do after? Yeah, colon. So I'm saying I want to make a property within this object. The name of the property is name, and then now I want to define the value that's going to be associated with that. And so for we want dog toy, and so what do I type here?
Sorry.
Yeah, so and it's very important to be a string in this case. So you can't not do a string here because we're defining a specific JavaScript type, not the property. Yeah. Okay, good. And then for the next one, price, what do I do?
Enter price.
Yep. And in this case, I don't want it to be a string. I want it to be a number in this case. And so that's fine. So we saw when we were doing certain arrays, we talked about typically you want the same type in the array. So there's homogeneous arrays, heterogeneous arrays, and typically you're going to be dealing with homogeneous where like each element in the array is of the same type. With an object, that's not the case. Like you're typically going to be mixing, like every property is probably going to be a potentially different type. It just depends on what data you're trying to model. So that's great. So I've got a number here instead of a string for the price. And then we've got two other properties, description and then quantity. And so we just keep following the same pattern. We can have as many properties on this object as we want. There's not any limit that there is a limit, but you're not going to ever run into it. So we'll add description. And then quantity. So we had 2 to start, okay. Okay, good, so we defined. An object, it's one thing that we're trying to represent, one shopping cart item, and we assign that to a variable. Okay, so if I want to console log the name of that shopping cart item, how do I do that?
Shopping cart object dot name.
Yep. So we're gonna grab the shopping cart object, which is that variable, and what's assigned to that variable is that whole object. So shopping cart object will turn into that whole object. And then if we want to access a property on it, dot name is typically the way you would want to be doing it. So the dot notation access. Where have we seen dot notation before?
Calling methods.
Calling methods,
Length.
the length. So dot length is a property on arrays. And it's identical to what I'm doing here. Like it's not, length is not a method, it's actually a property that gets updated as you add stuff or remove stuff from an array. And that's why we don't have to call it, because it's getting changed. And so, yeah, dot length is, you are doing the exact same thing as what I'm doing here with dot name. That's the dot notation to access a property on an object. And in this case, the one that we defined, which was name, but JavaScript will define properties for the different things available to you in the language. But it's just, you're doing the same thing here. There's another way you can access properties, less common. There's definitely use cases for it, specifically in the record collection style where you've got an object of objects. But typically you'll be doing dot notation. Sometimes there's another way you need to access a property, and which way is that? Yeah. So bracket notation for accessing properties. And that's slightly different. It looks like shopping cart object and then bracket notation. So similar to like accessing an index of an array, we use the bracket notation and then like 0, 1, 2, 3. In this case, if I want to do the exact same thing I'm doing on line 18, but I want to do it with this bracket notation. So what do I need to do here?
0.
Name in what? Yeah, so it's just like, yeah, this doesn't work. You can't do that.
Unless name was a variable that's stored.
Exactly. Yeah. So this syntax is basically saying, oh, you want me to go find the name variable and resolve that. And it's going to be like, hey, that's not defined. But what we want is the name property. And so you have to put it in strings like this. And so the reason we have this style is exactly for that reason. If we did have the property we were trying to access in a variable, which does happen, then that's the syntax for doing it. You use this bracket notation and pass the variable in and have it resolved to the property that you want. Okay, let's just make sure this is all working. So I'll open this up, live server. And then go to the console. Yeah. And then we see dog toy twice. Exact same thing happening, just different syntax for accessing it. Okay, so good. That's accessing properties on an object. We also sometimes need to update properties on an object or add new properties to an already existing object. So if I wanted to add, maybe there's no ratings on this item, this dog toy item yet, but then all of a sudden we add ratings to it. So if I want to give this toy a 5-star rating, but I can't, like, this is like, I can't do it here when I'm defining it. It's happening some other time later. How would I do that on line 21?
Shopping cart object dot ratings and just set it.
Yeah, just set it. Yeah, what's the syntax for that?
Like equals, 5 star, in quote, or maybe just 5, I'm not sure.
Yeah, like 5, maybe 5.0 or something. Because you might have like 4.7 or 4.6. Yeah, so this shopping cart object dot rating, so we access the property, but then we're doing something very similar to what we see when we're like assigning a value to a variable, right? Which is we use the assignment, which is equals, you know, and in programming, like you're used to equals, meaning like does it equal, you know, but in programming, double equals and triple equals means does it equal, and equals means assign. And so this is very similar to the syntax of signing a variable, but this is how you update a property. Okay, or if it doesn't exist, it'll make it. So this is the same syntax to update as well. So if we wanted to update the price, it's the same exact syntax. We do shopping cart object price equals the new price. Or let's say I wanted to just double the price of it. How would I do that?
Shopping cart object dot price times 2. Price equals 2.
So if I did this,
Well,
that's not going to actually mutate the object. This is going to, like, this is an expression. It's going to just give us a value. It's not actually going to change anything.
I'm saying like, so like you equals. So
Yeah.
You just shopping cart object of price times 2 on the right side.
Yes, good. Yeah, so this, yes, okay. So this works. There's also a shorter hand syntax, I think you were mentioning, which when we had variables, we could do times equal to or something, I think. Or like we remember like plus plus or minus minus. That is like shorthand syntax for saying basically this, like calculate this new value, but then assign it to that same thing. So yeah, we can do shopping cart item dot price. I never do this. Is it times equal? Is that really it? Okay. Getting. Oh.
Times equal to.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. Right. I'm sorry, I never do that. And so let's make sure this worked. Yeah, so we see we mutated it and then we console logged it and it did update. So we've talked a little bit about mutating and not mutating and things like that. It is pretty common to mutate properties in an object as they change. So that's totally fine. Okay, and then how do you remove a property from an object?
Delete.
Yeah, delete. So we had seen delete before. We were trying to use delete for arrays. You don't really want to use delete for arrays, but you do want to for objects. That's fine. So if I want to delete the ratings property, I can do delete shopping cart object dot ratings. And then we can just kind of console log. You don't have to just console log a property from the object. You can console log like anything that exists in JavaScript, you can console log no matter what. So we can just console log shopping cart object if we want to see what that looks like as well. So we can console log the object, we can console log an array of objects, we can console log, you know, however complex the type gets, we can console log it and look at it. And then typically the dev console will try to like give you some nice formatting to be able to look at it. And so when we log in, you know, like a number, it's just a plain number here like that. And notice for numbers, they highlight them blue, and for strings, it's just plain kind of gray text. For an object, you can see they're doing like gray, even more gray for like the property, and then the string is kind of red, and then the number's kind of blue, and they give you this like caret thing, and so you can expand it and then see all the properties on it. So notice, you know, we don't have ratings anymore, but we did at one point. Okay, so that is all. This is, you know, that's mainly what you need to know. Well, I want to blow your mind real quick. So, a method. What are some methods that we've seen before? Like, we've seen methods on arrays before.
Opt and, or not, or, push and.
Yes, yeah, those are methods on arrays. And when you use a method, what do you have to do to use it? Like, what's the syntax for like when you're calling push, like you type push and then you type what?
The string in the parentheses.
In the parentheses, yeah. And like using parentheses is, I typically say is like calling it. Like when you use parentheses, you're calling something. What else do we use parentheses with? To call functions, yeah. So functions and methods are basically the same, like they're the same thing, but a method is a function that is defined on something. So normally when we write a function, we just do it in the global scope of our program. So we, you know, function avatar string, you know, takes in a name, and then we'll return, you know, we did like const first initial equals name 0, and then we did const space index name dot index. So here's a method, right? Index of the space, and then slash initial equals name space index +1, and then return initial plus last initial. Okay, so here's our cool avatar string method we've been using, which will take a name, assuming you've put a space in between your first and last name, and return first initial, last initial together, which is typically what you see if you don't have like a photo. See like ZM for me. So index of is a method here that is defined on a string. So notice we're doing the dot notation to access a property, but that property is a function that we're calling, and it just sort of, because it's defined on a string, it's like it knows that you're trying to do it on that item. And so it's sort of like an implicit like it's an implicit parameter to the function, the thing itself that you're calling it on. That was quite a sentence, but like I'm passing in space for the index of, but I'm asking for the index of the space within the name string. And so the name is sort of like an implicit parameter that being passed into the index of function because it's defined on it. The whole point here was, though, that avatar string, that function, is not defined on anything. It's just defined in the global scope of our program. But I can define like, remember when I said we can have any sort of quantity, we can have any sort of, we can have any sort of type on as a property on an object. So like quantity in the shopping cart can be a number or a string or an array or an object. It can also be a function, which is kind of the mind-blowing part. And so like say hello can be a function that we can add to this. And we can say, console log hello. And by having that on there, whenever I'm accessing something from the shopping cart, so shopping cart object, if I want to use that method, I access it with dot notation, and then I type say hello, right? And then I need to do what to use it?
Open close parenthesis.
I call it, like it is a function. It's just defined on that object. So we can see what kind of happens here when we run this. We should see hello here, right? So that's happening because we're calling a function that's defined on our object, which when a function is defined on an object, we typically call it a method. You need to be able to access, like when you are defined on something, it's useful to be able to access the things on it. And so if I wanted to do that, there's this keyword called this, which means the item I'm defined on. So this meaning this object. So I can do this dot name. Sorry, you haven't seen, you can put commas in console log to like log more than one thing, but we typically have been doing like plus to do string concatenation. But let me make sure this works real quick. Yeah, so see hello dog toy here. That's happening because I'm doing console log hello plus this, meaning the current object I'm defined on name property. Name property has dog toy assigned to it. So this exactly what I just did here is how like name.index of is working. Like this, it's the exact same thing.
So how would you add that, instead of just putting it straight in the object, how would you add it to the object? Would you
Add the function to the object.
be like shopping cart object dot say hello equals in that function?
Yeah.
Okay, I tried that, I got an error.
What was the error? This is quite advanced, but I just want to make sure that you guys understand, like when you're accessing length and when you're accessing push and pop, this is what's happening. Like you're accessing a property or a method on that item. And it's the exact same syntax of whenever you make your own object, you're typically just adding properties, and we typically don't follow this style of adding methods to it, but you can, and that's the mechanism for how everything else is working that you're dealing with. Sorry, what was here?
No, it was, I had started writing a separate function, I didn't have this.
Okay, yeah.
All methods on string.
What?
Why can we call index of on name?
You jerk. So everything in JavaScript, even arrays, even strings, even numbers, they're all objects. So everything in JavaScript is an object. And that's why you can, on a string, you can access methods on the string because they are properties on that object. And then the string itself, has like a value, and that's the actual value of the string. Like I don't know actually how they do it, but there's probably some sort of value property or something like that that implicitly returns whenever you access that string. Yeah, so everything in JavaScript is an object, and that's why there's typically properties on them. Undefined, I think, is probably just like an object that has no properties kind of thing, except for undefined. Yeah. So that's kind of a peek into like, under the hood of what's going on. But it should have made some things click of like, what is this dot notation? And like, then I'm calling this thing and like, or I'm not calling this thing. Well, that's because length is a property on that object, whereas, push is a method. And that's why it seems like you would have to call length, kind of seems like a method, but it just happens to be a property. Yeah. Okay. So the whole, yeah, so this whole thing here that we were kind of talking about though is. You know, we want this sort of. We don't want one shopping cart item, so far we've only defined. One shopping cart item, so just that first dog toy. But if we want to represent. Multiple things, if we, and you know, that's how a shopping cart works, it's a thing that can have more than one item in it. There's a number of items in your shopping cart, right? So if we wanted to represent it this way, and I actually recommend most of the time you're going to want to represent a bundle like this, you know, where you have more than one item as an array of objects. That's what you should grab first. You should not typically lean towards using the record collection style, which is the object that has a bunch of objects in it. It's just not as common, and there's reasons for that we'll get into. But so if we want to do this here, let's make that. So if I want to make, you know, const shopping cart equals, so I said I want to do an array of objects. So what's the first thing I need to type here to get this started? We're going to define that whole shopping cart with both those items here. Yep, so that's how we make an array. And then we'll do a new line just like we were doing on the objects. And then the first element in the shopping cart is going to be what type? An object, yeah. So is the second element. So this is like a homogeneous array, even though it's going to have like a bunch of data within it. It's still like every element in the shopping cart is an object, right? So then here we just do exactly what we did up here. Like we want to add this item, and so we can just add the object like directly inside the array if we want to. So I'll just copy this. I could also just reference the variable. Like I could just put shopping cart object variable right here like this. Sorry. So shopping cart object, I could do this and then go to the next one and then define this one this way directly. Or I can, you know, directly define both of them. So actually, let's do that. Do what?
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, obviously you would want your objects in your list to be the same structure. And
Typically, yes. Yeah. So yeah, this is good. So when we make an Excel spreadsheet, we don't, like, if we make a column, that column is defined for every row. You could, you know, not put something in that column, but it's, yeah, like there's no way to, in an Excel spreadsheet, if you, I mean, if you're using it correctly, to say like this property only applies to this single row. You know, like if you're going to add a property, you have to add it for the whole spreadsheet. You can't do it for one object. In JavaScript, you certainly can. Like I could just define another object, and it could it could be like a shopping cart, and then I could have a shopping cart item, and then I could put a blog post, you know, and like completely break the what's called the schema, so that like what properties should exist within this thing. You certainly can do that.
use that in the real world.
No, I mean, yes, but it's horrible if that happens. Yeah, yeah.
Practice.
Yeah, it's not a good practice. Yeah. Now there might be properties that, you know, 50% of the items have, you know, and they would just be undefined for those items. But it's still like the same thing. Like you're still like we saw, we might have reviews for only 50% of the items in like our entire store. Like you might have an array that's like, you know, every item available to buy on a page, right? And not like some of them might be new, and so there's no one's bought it yet. And so the reviews you know, it could be that the reviews are 0 stars, but that's not accurate because it doesn't have any reviews. And so you would probably represent that as either null or undefined. And so like you wouldn't, or just you wouldn't have that property at all. But like it still could have that property. It's not like the item is somehow fundamentally different and would
Which
never
that
have
is
it.
also good practice versus like an empty string, right? Having null or undefined.
It
Or
would,
is it about the same?
yeah, so here, yeah, this is kind of advanced, but let's say you want you have a property, you have like a array of objects, and the objects are people, like you're trying to model a person. They have a name and they have an address and they have an age, and then they might have like deceased date or something, like day they died. Null, like saying null is more specific than undefined, because like you could, like there's you could not know if they're dead, and that would might be undefined. Like you're not, you don't have that information. You don't know if they're alive or dead, and it could be undefined. But if they are dead, or if they are not dead, you might say null. Like like I know that this is blank. Now that's not necessarily how everybody uses that, but you'll see that in certain cases where like there's like you'll use undefined and null differently, meaning like I know for sure that this is blank versus it's blank and it never was set, kind of thing. And then empty string is sort of not great. We would prefer undefined probably over, unless it's like, yo. I'm trying to think, when would you use empty string for something versus undefined?
So it's like if you're kind of goes, you don't really know about like TypeScript and stuff, but like there's versions of JavaScript where you want to maintain the same type always. And so like you have an input and you want the value to always be a string, right? And so if the input is empty, you don't want it to be null or undefined, because you want it to always be a string. And so it'll be the value of the input will be empty string. Or like you save an object that one of the properties would always be a string, you say that's the database, you still want it to be a string when you pull it out. And so you would save the empty string and not null or undefined if you wanted that property to always be a string. It's just like,
Yeah, I often find myself having to check whether something's null or empty string. I think people just do it differently. It's like.
Mhm. Yeah. And we'll, yeah, checking for that, you'll see people, we need to talk about, you'll hear people say truthy or falsy in JavaScript. We need to get to that at some point. Maybe we can do that today. But yeah, back to the task at hand. If we wanted to add the second item here, so we're adding the first item that we had already defined by just referencing the variable that has it defined in it, but we can also just define it in line, like as we're defining the array. And so if we want to add our second item, which was paper towels, we can do name.
so I think a big reason to use a string is that if a value is always a string, you can always call string properties on it, like length and stuff. So then you don't have to check like, hey, is this undefined before I do something on it? Because if you know it's a string, then you can say dot length and it'll just be 0 anyways, right? So you can always manage the same variable the same way for every case without having to do a check. Like, if this is undefined, don't do that because it's not that one is, right? So that's kind of like the reason to make sure that you skip the checks later is always a string.
Yeah.
Which is also the point of when you're storing values into an object's key or whatever, making sure that you're storing it. As a same data type, that's what that object is,
Mhm.
versus like basic and match. Stuff,
Yeah, that'd be
which
bad.
doesn't happen.
Yeah. So that, what was just brought up is you guys have seen this before. Which is at some point you probably saw. Let's say we were expecting a variable to be a string and we wanted the index of the space within the string, which we do for our avatar string. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm asking for the space, but the variable wasn't actually storing a string. Like you messed up your program and it wasn't getting set correctly. And so that's what this error, like uncaught type error, cannot read properties of undefined is often what you'll see. Is because it wasn't actually a string and you're trying to access a property on undefined, and undefined has no properties. And so that's this error. Okay, so yeah, good. So empty string has properties. So index of doesn't throw an error, it just tells you, I guess -1 means it's not in there. Yeah. That's a weird. JavaScript's weird sometimes.
The same reason, but the other way. So now you always expect the result to be a
A number, yeah.
And so you never, like, it's never like, oh, false, we didn't find it. But if we did find it, it returns a number, so that like now you're getting a false and a number, so this.
Yeah.
If it doesn't find it, it's always a number too.
Yeah.
Me too, so
That's where it's taken from.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we defined this shopping cart. So we've got an array of how many items here in our shopping cart? 2. So remember we did this fancy object thing here, which is going to resolve to that first object we defined. Yeah, so if we console log this and just take a peek, because remember we can console log anything. So we can log our shopping cart and look at this. So we've got, you'll notice in the console, it's like, hey, this is an array. You can kind of see like there's 2 items in it. And then each element it's saying an object. It's doing like, it's an object because of the brackets, and then it's just saying there's stuff in there. That's what the ellipses are for. But then we can expand it and see both items. Okay, so this is an array of objects. And we have 0 and 1 for the positions, which is very similar to the rows, right? So there is an order. There's the first item in the shopping cart, the second item in the shopping cart. That's nice because you add items to your shopping cart in a particular order. And so as you add them to the cart, it's going to maintain that order so that when you go to the shopping cart, it's going to be in the order with which you added them. Whereas an object like the record collection, there really is no order to it. It's just a key. It's just the keys, and the keys could be strings. It could be like dog toy, paper towels. There is no sensical order to that. Now it'll be displayed in a particular order, but it's really just a collection of keys and values. And so we want to maintain this sort of, hey, there's the first one, and then there's the second one, and you can sort an array. So we'll see these things later. There's a method to sort an array, and we can sort it by whatever we want. Like we could say sort it by price, or sort it by the name, or sort it by the ratings, or something like that. And so you'll see, it's more advanced, but you'll see methods that we can use on an array to decide to do that. We'll get to those. So it's nice to store stuff as an array of objects often. And so I think it's the best way to model our shopping cart personally. Okay, so if I want to console log the first item's price, what's the syntax for that here? So we'll change line 48 to do that. Console log the price of the first item. That's all I want to see. So pretty close. So remember, the first item in an array is going to be the 0 index. Yeah, okay. And then, so we're going to use the 0 index and we're going to use price. But what's the specific syntax to do that here? What do I type? Bracket 0. So we're dealing with an array, right? So shopping cart's an array. Don't worry about what's inside it. Don't worry about what the elements are. Like you could have the most complicated data type ever. That could be an array with arrays, with objects and whatever. But like the outermost thing is what you're talking to at the moment. And that thing is an array. And to access the first element in an array, no matter what that element is just bracket with the index of the thing. So yeah, we're going to grab the first element of the shopping cart. Now, the first element of the shopping cart is what? It's an object. Yeah. What did you say?
Sorry.
It's an object. And so now replace in your brain that now you're dealing with an object. Like shopping cart 0, great, whatever. But after this bracket, now you're in object land. And how do you access a property on an object? Dot notation. So that's perfectly valid. You're like, whoa, like I didn't, I'm used to using dot on a variable, but like as you saw me do in the console, I was doing like dot on a string. Like I was doing like string dot index of, like, so when properties and methods are all things on raw data types. And so you got to just replace whatever is happening in the code with the correct type to know what you can do. And so shopping cart 0 is going to turn into an object. And so I can do dot notation on an object. And so you can just immediately type dot. You don't need to save it to a variable or anything, because when you reference the variable is being turned into that thing. So you just need to be good at replacing what you're looking at in your head with the type that you're dealing with. So object, and then we said price, right? We want the price property, so we'll just access that. So shopping cart, grab the first item. The first item is an object, so grab the price property on it. So that's how we can do that. And so we can see 998 is being logged here. What?
That's not the right one. Or, I guess it multiplied by 2, right?
So this is the incredible thing that's going on here. So, everything in JavaScript, is what's called, or not everything, but objects, are by reference. And so like whenever I added this shopping cart object, to this shopping cart, like I'm saying, add that object, the shopping cart object, which is defined up here. Shopping cart object is up here. So this is the thing we were adding. But whatever, so like I could even, you might think like, okay, like when I add it to that array, it's gonna like copy it or something, like get the values and put it in there. And then now shopping cart is its own thing with those objects, and they're on their own. But I could have defined this up here. I could have, done, so I define the shopping cart and then I add that object. I'm sorry, I define that single object, the first shopping cart item, and then I add it to our shopping cart in addition to adding another item. And then later on in the program, I multiply the price, I mutate the price. And so I have a reference to that object. When I do that, I'm changing the object, but I'm like that object is also in the shopping cart array. And so it's changing in both places because it's not in both places. It's just one thing and a reference to it. So this is called by reference. So yeah, whenever I mutate any object in the shopping cart, no matter where I do it, it's going to change it in the shopping cart as well. That's kind of wild, but
So maybe, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead. How would you add? So you have your array of objects, the two objects in there. It's, in our code, we had shopping cart object dot raise equals 5.0. How would you add the key value paired to
the second
the
one.
entire, the entire.
To the entire array of objects, the entire shopping cart. Yeah, so you're gonna learn about looping for the, I think
So
that,
you just look at them.
yeah. So
I
the
don't
already,
know if it's-
well, there is a function we can use, but the function is doing looping under the hood. So there's methods that we'll use that you'll get exposed to here that are more advanced. And they are like under the hood, they are looping through each item in the array and doing something to each element in the array. But I don't want to use those methods until you've learned about looping, so you understand like what those methods are doing. But I think the homework. Yeah, so the homework that for after today's class is learning about looping, which really strap in. Like today was tough, and then looping's going to be wild, but then like you'll get through it, and then you'll have seen every crazy thing that exists in a programming language, and then it slows down a little bit. But looping is really cool. It's super cool. So hopefully you'll find it really fun. And then there's actually a catch-up day, so look forward to that. So if you're like, things are going fast, it's fast for one more day, and then you can catch up. So yeah, when we learn looping, we'll see a way to basically like, let's say we have not our shopping cart, but we've got like an array of all the items in our store. Like we have our coffee shop, and we have stuff that's on the menu. And so instead of just like immediately putting those menu items in the HTML, typically what we'll do is we'll put those menu items in an array of objects. Like we want to like store our data that represents our coffee shop. And so we'll have an array that's called like menu items, and then we'll have like our espresso, and the espresso would be an object though with like name and price and description, and then cappuccino, and then on and on and on, right? So we've got all of the stuff in our store in an array of objects, and then like temporarily we're offering a discount code or something, like the store is 20% off. So you wouldn't literally do this, but like you would just apply the discount in the shop, like when they're checking out or whatever. But let's say you needed to like actually, no, you might do this because you need to maybe change the price on the page, right? So to show the 20% discount. So in that case, you might say, okay, I need to go through each item in the cart. I don't know how many there are. There might be 10, there might be 50, there might be 100, but I need to go through each one. And then I need to times the price by 0.75 or whatever. And so that idea of, hey, I need to update every item in the shopping cart is where looping comes in. And so we learn about loops, which is, hey, I need to do something a certain amount of times. And I actually don't know when I'm writing the program how many times that's going to be. It's going to be based off of something like the length of the array. So like our shopping cart might have 65 items, 100 items, but we'd say, hey, loop through this array for however long it is. So basically for each element, do something. And that's what looping's for, or that's a common use case for looping. So that's how you would do that. Okay. Okay, so so I mentioned there's like some more advanced methods that use looping under the hood. And so one of those that's pretty useful that I just want to point out is called find. So we like we have this shopping cart. Let's say we've got like a bunch of items in it. And we're not using that record collection that had the index be the name of the item. Like, so in our array, we have to access the properties by like the position, like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But if we need to find an item by name in our shopping cart, for example, it's really hard to do that when it's an array because like you have to like find the index of where that thing is, and like you're typically trying to find it by some property on it. And so there's a method on arrays called find. And so we can do, you know, shopping cart dot find is a method to find on arrays. And since we've seen, I think we used find index before with like strings and stuff like that. But in this case, we're trying to find an object that has a particular property, and that property has a particular value. And so we use this, we can use find index to find the index, or we can use find to just actually get the full object back to like find that particular object. And so we can do find. Wow, that looks like crap. We can do find, and find takes a function that defines I actually should not be teaching this right now. Just forget about this. Just that didn't happen. It's 11 o'clock anyways. Let's take our break. We'll learn about that method eventually, but essentially it'll loop. We're going to say, hey, find something in the shopping cart that has the name dog toy. And so there's a way to say that, like find something with name dog toy, and it will loop through the array and find it. And then once it finds it, it will return it to you. So that's what. But the syntax is a little complicated, so we'll learn about that later. I guess any questions or anything before we break? I know this is pretty advanced, but hopefully the use cases make sense. Okay, all right, let's take 10. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What?
I felt like this shouldn't be 998, but I don't think it worked with.
It was 499 times 2.
Well, I know, but I didn't think it would actually keep the reference.
Yeah, it does. That's what
I
JavaScript
just
does.
don't think I've ever used objects directly defined, you know what I mean? Like that was just come already
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the array.
Yeah, but if you find that object, like if you do array.find and then you assign that object to a variable,
Yeah.
and then you change a property on it, it's changing it in the array of objects. It's changing it unless you make a copy of it. Like if you
Well, I
like,
think. Doesn't find, make a copy.
I don't think so. Yeah, it's just gonna return. I don't think it's doing a copy. I mean, there's certain methods that do, but that one doesn't.
The array method.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, something that was weird. So like in your meeting here on the screen, whatever. It's weird that in the, I guess the cleaner formatter formats and tabs, comma after the lines.
Yeah,
It kind of bugs me because of
Yeah.
you're pulling like JSON and stuff. It doesn't,
yeah.
I guess, does it just indicate that it's mutable, or you could append objects with your code or something?
It's just like it makes it easier to add a new item if you ever need to. So
It's
people
called
just
a-
like it.
Trailing comma.
Yeah.
And you can disable it if you want to.
Yeah.
So you can make a prettier config if you want to go through the trouble of doing all that, and you can make it style your code according to all the rules that you set, and so you can turn it off. But
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just, it is like, because when you do console log here, it doesn't include control and commas, it's not just.
Right.
It's just kind of weird that it says it tries to 4 minutes of that.
it's basically for like when you come back to that array, the next time you're writing the code again, there's already the comma there, so you won't like make a mistake, like, oh, new line, type stuff, oh, my code broke, why?
I forgot to have a comment.
If the comma's already there, and it'll always be there, and so just like it's so you
It
can
really saves you like half a second,
yeah.
but like people love saving. half a second.
I always use this, I'm used to it, it's weird without it. I think I manually type it sometimes.
But yeah, that is invalid in JSON. You cannot have a trailing comment. But inside JavaScript. it's fine.
That's just weird. I haven't come across like.
Yeah.
I love all the terrible things,
I know.
like defining an object where the keys are not strings, you know, just it gets so wonky.
What'd you say?
Like finding an object that was like like square brackets on the left side of the colon. So you can make it
Oh,
like 14 is the key of this. You have to access it with a number with 14.
yeah.
So much
You can teach it.
you know.
I actually really enjoyed the HTML class this time. I like actually learned Flexbox for the first time.
Then there's an assignment.
There's just so many little quirks in JavaScript just because it's the wild west. I love that. All the stupid little things. that we
Yeah, yeah,
Like truth and falsity.
yeah.
All the ins and outs. I mean, that's what people say, but.
Yeah.
Go, let it work. And I mean.
Excited for me.
Which it is. And that's what. Behavior.
You just have a full TV and it's just unopened in there.
I know. It's funny.
They just buy the TV and just leave it there. I guess I could give.
That's it. There's a navigation bar.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I loved him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's going to the next step in the interview.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Is he expensive?
Yeah, but we're a little bit under what he wanted, but I think he's still interested, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
California.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Bison paid a lot.
Yeah.
So
One of
I can mute.
I was reading.
All right. Okay, so that's all the new stuff that we needed to go over. Hopefully you're feeling decent about it. If not, I would just keep playing with it. It kind of a lot of stuff becomes like muscle memory in this stuff. So, okay, so there's nothing new today. And so I want to loop back on the bottles of beer and the stuff we did last Saturday, the coffee shop 2.0 stuff. So for bottles of beer, I also want to show you guys how to generate this stuff with ChatGPT. Because I think it's really gonna kind of change the field, and I think it's worth you guys knowing about it. And if you get stuck, it can be something that can help you. So with bottles of beer, I went to ChatGPT. And I had this prompt. So you just go to ChatGPT, you get an account, and then there's this message thing, and then you can paste a decent size message here. And so these are pretty close to the instructions I gave you. Also, there's the instructions I gave you, which was what we're trying to do, make this bottles of beer thing and have this button and yada yada. To get ChatGPT to actually generate what you need, you have to give it a little bit of detail of just constraints for what it should do. And so I said just think about what we're doing in class. We're doing plain JavaScript, and we're doing it all in one file, so I just said write a full HTML file that solves the following. It should use a script tag for all the JavaScript. All the JavaScript should be plain JS. And then basically just the instructions that you all saw. So you're just giving it requirements for what you want. So, prompt the user on page load for a number to start with. Once you have that number from them, write NP tag that many bottles of beer on the wall. Add the button for take one down. After clicking the button, you should do this. And then I also said, because we have used event listeners so far, and I hadn't mentioned that, and there's more than one way in JavaScript to add an on-click to something. You can there's an on-click property on buttons, but I haven't shown you guys that, so I told it use an event listener for the button rather than the button on-click property. So you can just specify all this stuff like that, and then and often you need to tell it in certain cases to only return code, because sometimes it'll explain what it's doing, give you multiple snippets. So you can say only respond with code, but we can go ahead and just see what this does from here. So you can see it's explaining what it did, which could be useful for you all as well. Yeah, you can, it's yeah, you just search ChatGPT. Yeah. I mean, I think that this thing can be a helpful teacher for you. You can ask it questions, you can have it generate code. I think it's just and it's rapidly changing our field right now. And so I think it's worth you guys getting ahead of it and knowing about it. Yeah.
So do you use it, cause I use it daily. I
Do you
it
use
daily, just
like
as-
ChatGPT or do you use the Copilot?
ChatGPT.
Okay, yeah.
Um. So you use Copilot a lot, yeah?
I'm using it more, but it's like, it can't do like this, like full prompt thing yet. Like all it can do is like one line
Oh, just autocomplete.
Yeah. and like you can have it write a function for you kind of thing, but they're gonna update it. To allow this pretty soon. Yeah,
Is the account free or do you have that?
there's a free version. This is the free version that I'm using, yeah. I'm not sure what the premium one does, but I think it's only like $20 or something,
It's GPT-4. This GPT
0.5.
3.5, yeah.
It might be worth it then, but you can see it, like it's pretty good at code. And so it's like, I think it's gonna typically give you accurate stuff. So what it generated here is slightly different than what it generated the first time, I think. So let me just copy this. Oh yeah, and then you can also just say, so I can go up here and change this prompt. Like I had mentioned, to say, only return code. Yeah,
That's smart thing to do. It'll come out.
and sometimes it does that. I find a little annoying that it's like the snippet thing didn't work perfectly. So I kind of, you haven't seen that happen? Huh. Let's just do in class. Eventually this like is going to be integrated in VS Code. So I have this Copilot thing that I always turn off, which is like a light version of this. Okay, so we can save this. And like, if you're going to do this, your task is then to like read every line and understand what is going on. But this is stuff that you should, so the only thing that may be odd to you that you haven't seen before is this on load thing. We've not used that. Don't worry about that. It's you're never going to have to worry about that, because when we move to React, like this style just isn't really a thing. So don't worry about that, but everything else should be relatively familiar to you. So there's the prompt that we've been using. Create, I don't know if I've shown you create element. I don't know if you guys have often done that. We've typically like put something in the page and then grabbed it by ID. But this is choosing to like create all the HTML in the JavaScript in this case. And you can see it's even creating the button. But then it appends that to the page, and then it adds this event listener. So we've seen the event listeners before, that's familiar. But yeah, let's go ahead and just look at what it created. So 98 bottles of beer on the wall, take one down. 90, and it's putting it below the button, which I guess that's fine. 96 bottles of beer on the wall, 95.
Otherwise, your button's gonna.
That's
drag down.
fair, yeah, that's a good point.
So it's actually.
Yeah. But yeah, here it is. This isn't exactly right. But let's go look at the other one that, oh, did I stop sharing? Let's go look at so here's the first one it gave me. And I actually like this one more. I don't know why it's different all of a sudden. That's another, like, it's not going to give you the same response every time. Well, let's go ahead and take a peek at this one, and then we can go through the code. So, and I actually changed this one. Oh, what happened? Okay. Okay, so 99 bottles of beer on the wall, take one down. So this is like the full lyric thing. Take one down, pass it around. 98 bottles of beer on the wall. Yeah, take one down, pass it around. 97 bottles of beer on the wall. I think actually the whole thing also is like you repeat the first thing, but anyways. So this is what we were going for. This is correct. And yeah, the button is moving down every time. So it would be nice to move the button actually. I agree. Okay, so let's dig into the code. So we've got our title and H1, and then we've got our paragraph with an ID bottles, which is where we want to append the sentences for the song. And then we've got our button with an ID take one for the take one down button. So this is the style that we've typically been doing in class, which is we add some stuff to the HTML and then we grab it from the JavaScript. So this is kind of the shell. And then we set a variable to the number of bottles. And this, is going to change as we keep getting through the song from 99 to 98 to 97. And so that's why it's not a const. It's because we actually need to mutate it. We need to decrement it every time. And then we grab our button. So we do the document get element by ID, the button to generate the song. And then we grab the paragraph where we want to keep appending the different pieces of the song. And then it did something nice here, which really, this is very close to what I would have written myself, where they have a function to like start the song. It chose game, which is interesting, start game. I probably would have done start song, but this is to like kick the program off. And so the first thing we do when we start is we prompt for the number of bottles to start with. And then right after they've given us that prompt, and notice it's updating this, like this function is reaching out and updating that global number of bottles because we need to reference it throughout the whole program. So it's updating number of bottles to whatever we type, and then it's just going to go ahead and immediately change the HTML of the bottles paragraph to have, whatever we typed, 99, 98, whatever, plus bottles of beer on the wall. So start the game does the prompt and then adds the sentence to the paragraph. And then we've got our button, which is the take one button. And notice like the start game function, all that happens is we just call it at the very end, basically, to start it. So we could have just defined this outside of the function and had it happen, but it's just kind of nice. As I mentioned, like functions are a good way to organize and name your code. And so we're just trying to kind of organize our code and name it. Instead of just having a bunch of code, we kind of group it into functions, just a little bit cleaner. So we call that start game function at the end of our script. And then we also add the event listener for the click of the take one down button, which then is just this function here. So our program is just two functions: to start the game and then to keep playing the game with the button click. And whenever we click the button, we decrement the number of bottles from, if we start at 99 to 98, it did this really great thing. I didn't say anything about the end game, right? Nobody gets to the end of this game. Everyone stops at 95, right? But it actually considered getting to 0, right? Because you're supposed to take all the bottles down. And so it's great that it did this, because if you get to the end, I had no instructions for that, but this makes a lot of sense. Like once you get to 0 bottles, the song is no more bottles of beer on the wall, I think. And so it's handling that for us with an if statement that we learned about recently. So once we get down to 0, then we're gonna end the song with no more bottles of beer on the wall. Notice it's kind of just doing this string appending, like the paragraph that we have is just getting more and more and more text. And they're using this, does anyone remember this break character in HTML that we had used? So it's just like, it's just adding strings. We could have kept adding like additional paragraphs or something, but in this case, it's just updating the string within a single paragraph and then putting a break between them to get that new line. So we get, no more bottles of beer on the wall. And then it removes the, like, how we added the event listener. You can also remove one so that, now clicking that button won't do anything, which is good. So we remove the event listener that we had for the click. And then you can also disable buttons. So, and so disabled is a property on the element, which is that button. And so we set it to true to disable it. And so let me just change this program to be, because we're not going to go that far. We'll start with 95 to see that. Okay, so if we're not at 0 though, we do this else piece and we do the, append a break and then take one down, pass it around, plus our current number of bottles that we're on, plus bottles of beer on the wall. So that's the extent of the program. And then we can kind of go ahead and look at what it looks like when I changed it to 95. We hit 95. Notice when you disable a button, it automatically makes it gray like that for you. That's just a default behavior of HTML. And I can no longer click that button because there's no more bottles of beer on the wall. Yeah, so now that you guys have learned about if, we didn't know about if or else when you guys first did this exercise, but that's like really useful. Like we often need to consider different states our program might be in and then kind of change the program at that point. Any questions about this? Does this make sense what we just saw? Okay.
When you posted the code to Slack, I was curious why you decided to use like string appending, because on the day of the class, you showed us some like node creation thing.
Yeah.
So I thought that was funny. So I don't know if you said that you used ChatGPT.
I did, yeah. I did. Yeah. Well, I was starting to, so this is the first time I've tried to use it and I was starting to write the answer and I was like, I feel like I should check and see like what this thing can do. And I just like blew my mind. Like, I just had no idea that it, like, it really is going to really change the field. Like, I'm probably going to be pretty soon, like using it to generate a lot of the code that I write like professionally. Hopefully, like, I think that's what's going to happen. Yeah.
So it should basically increase the volume of code a single coder can put out.
Yeah.
It's real corporate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, it doesn't replace coders, like, so you guys shouldn't be worried. It's just about getting it as fast as you can to the point where you can understand what it's generating so that you know how to use it correctly. But
On the bright side, what I heard is it won't replace developers. It'll make it to where developers are producing more code.
Right,
for sure.
yes.
For sure.
Well, that's the bright side.
Yeah.
Whether that's true or not.
Yeah. Well, also there's a lot of tedium in coding. Like there's a lot of stuff that is like not as fun. And like it kind of will get rid of that. Basically, I mean, the whole history of programming is like we started with, your parents talk about punch cards or whatever. Like it's a nightmare. Like it takes forever. And then we created a higher order language to make it so that we could do things faster. And like every new language is basically just an attempt to make it so that you can do more faster. And so ChatGPT in a way is just a new higher order language. Like you don't have to write the code. You can write these prompts that'll generate the code and then you can just tweak it to make sure it's doing exactly what you need. So you still need to know how to code, but you just don't have to write as much. It's great. Yeah.
I do think it'll get to where you won't, I think it'll get to that. And it could get good at fixing itself.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll just say. I want an app on my phone, or whatever, it'll create the app for you, and then you can kind of tweak it and stuff. like that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's. I don't think that's very complex.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's intense, it's, I would have never thought, coming out of college, I would have never thought something like this
Yeah.
would happen. So soon.
Yeah.
Well, I can use the extra intelligence.
Good. Good. Yeah, and there's many ways to solve something, so we could probably tell it to use, let's go ahead and do that. I think we were doing append child. Instead of changing the text, so we can.
So if you disable the button, will you have to re-enable the button? Or will it just stay?
And the second button that says restart game.
Yeah, you could restart the game. Yeah. Yeah, let's update this one and see if.
So do you have to change the prompt, or can you just like talk back and forth to like, oh, okay, like now make it better, let's get that.
Oh, I don't know. That's a
Yeah,
great
yeah.
question.
You just ask it to fix it.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't change the prompt. I should just.
No, yeah, you can just type it directly in the thing, it'll just kind of update it.
Maybe throw tweets in there.
Apparently there are people getting jobs being prompts for
Yeah.
AI systems.
Will make someone more qualified for that.
The describer.
Technical,
Yeah.
yeah. Break that prompt 20% faster than someone else.
Start using AI to generate the prompts to
Yeah.
fix AI.
Oh, yeah, it's got the start on there.
Okay,
And GPT-4 is like,
Even better.
it's a little bit better. Yeah. It's a little bit slower, but it's pretty, yeah.
It's using, so this is a loop here. We haven't learned about a loop yet, but so I can also probably tell it not to use a loop. Yeah, it's just. All right, so let's try this. Oh, it generated the whole song. That's why it did the loop was, and actually we were gonna do this once we learned looping, like the whole like button based thing. Was just because that's like all we knew at that point. But once we learn looping, you can just actually generate the whole song. Like, so you can start at 99 and say, hey, loop until you get to 0 and then stop. And so that's what it did here. I wouldn't say it's a little prettier, this button, but it's, why would I take one down at this point? That's weird. So yeah, I mean, you're not gonna get exactly what you need. So is it like, do you re-prompt it to get what you need, or do you
So
just change the code?
Top, so it's not dragging down. Get rid of the loop.
You think that's all I need?
It does get to a point where you're just like going back and forth, you're like, all right, I understand.
Yeah. I guess I don't need to say please, but
At the top.
Oh my God. I mean, you guys know what this is, right? This is a link to pull in a font. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, this is closer to.
My neighbor's Wi-Fi, give me the network. Yeah. Okay.
I moved it down, that's cool.
Oh, that's so weird. Okay, that's interesting. I mean, so this is not exactly right. I don't know.
Yeah, it keeps the update in the center of the page without having it,
Yeah.
but that is weird.
Yeah. So anyways, I don't know. I mean, this isn't exactly what I was thinking about doing, but I think that this is like, and I think important to start messing around with for you all.
You can also, if you did an error, you can copy your code. and put it in.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, so I think this is hugely, yeah, we should all be talking about how can this help you all more in Slack. That's really a good point, yeah. Okay, so, all right, I wanted to talk, we might not have enough time, I don't want to go over today, but I was gonna go over the coffee shop 2.0 stuff. And let's not use ChatGPT. Let's just start from scratch and just kind of implement some of the stuff that we learned today. So what? Okay. Okay, so I want to do bare bones stuff, just so we are just applying the array of object stuff that we learned. So we're gonna have a div with ID equals shopping cart. And then within here, we'll have a div or a P, then ID, total items, and then P with an ID of total price. I don't know if we'll actually need to use anything with this outer div, but because we're just going to update the items. Like as we add stuff to our cart, we're just going to update the total number of items and then the total price. Okay. And then we'll add a few different items. So I'll just do P tags with ID equals coffee. And then espresso, is that how you spell that? And okay, that's not how you spell it. Okay, so we have not quite learned looping, and so there's a little bit of an awkward thing happening, but I want to show you like what we would. Like the desired thing that we would normally do is we'd have a script tag. And within there, we're gonna have an array of objects for everything that's available within our store. And so that would look like const menu items equals an array, and then we'll have objects. And we'll have name. So exactly what we did earlier, name, coffee, description, piping hot, and then price, $4.99. And then let me just duplicate this. Okay, so we would represent the stuff that's available within our coffee shop as an array of objects. And then what we would do is we'd have like a standard template for what an item should look like a card, you know, where it's like there's a picture, there's the title, there's the description and the price. Like every single thing is going to have that. And so basically there's a template for what that would look like on the page. It'd be like menu item card or something like that. And then you would loop through all your menu items and add those cards to the page. And then you would just inject the specific properties for that item into the card. So you would change the title to be, if you're on this item, to coffee, and the description if you're on this item to piping hot, and then the price to $4.99. So that's how you, like, when you have looping available to you and you have your data represented in your JavaScript, you can then more easily create the page. And like it's like less code and it's a little bit cleaner. Like, because when you guys were doing it, you had to like put all the stuff in the HTML, and then you had to like add event listeners to every single one. And then you were like, well, there's like information in the HTML and in the JavaScript, you know, like the price was like you had to like put $4.99 in the HTML, but then you also needed to like use that price in your JavaScript to get like the current total of the shopping cart and stuff like that. So once we have looping available to us, that like issue can be resolved more easily. So we can represent our menu items like this. And then we also, for example, might have like image, which would be like a link to an image that you can use to then set the image on the page as well. But we're not going to do that for now. So there's menu items that we want to have, and then there's our actual shopping cart, which is going to just start as an empty array because we have nothing in the shopping cart. Okay. So we need to add event listeners for these whenever we click on. I'm not going to add a button. I'm just going to have this p tag, and then I'm just going to, when you click the p tag, we'll add the item to the cart. So we need event listeners on these two paragraphs. So we need to get those by ID. So we'll do const coffee paragraph equals document.get element by ID coffee. And then we'll do the same thing for espresso. And then we want to write a function for when they click on it. So we'll do function Menu item clicked. We'll pass in the name. Okay, so this is like the new thing we want to do is instead of having our shopping cart just be the names of the items. Well, actually, there's a few ways we can do this. Our shopping cart could be the names of the items like we've done before, like because we just had an array of strings. We can also have the shopping cart be the actual objects. So like we can, whenever you add something, we can put this whole object in the shopping cart. The reason we'd want to do that is like if we want to like sum to get the total of the shopping cart, we would have the price available to us. You can do it, you can do it that way, but we could also, like we have this menu item thing, and if our shopping cart has the names of the items, like we can look up the price within the menu items thing as well. So you could do it either way. And there's not like a strong reason to do either one. But let's go ahead and just add the whole object to the shopping cart whenever we click on it. So when you click on an item, we're going to all of this needs looping. So I think so you're going to learn about looping for the homework today. So I think honestly, I think we should pause here, and then you guys will learn about looping for Wednesday. And then this whole example will just be a lot cleaner and easier. But hopefully you can kind of start to see that like representing our shopping cart and our menu items in this way, like with an array of objects, it like just makes a lot more sense because we have to kind of co-locate a lot of this information of the description and the price, and then potentially the quantity and things like that as well. And then once we add looping, we'll see like it'll be easy to like find the total price of all the items in the shopping cart and things like that. Okay, any questions or anything? Okay. All right, we'll enjoy the, yeah.
So do you normally define? So what's the point in doing like menu items equals and then like explicitly putting all that out versus like doing like menu item? I guess that's an array, but like if like for an object, menu item equals, then you have your object name copy versus like constant menu item equals the curly bracket, and then I think you're doing menu item dot name equals like.
Are you talking about like this section of code here?
Yeah, so if you had like a menu item object that you're defining before.
Like for coffee?
Yeah,
Yeah.
copy item. Yeah. So, yeah, is there a standard of doing something like that coffee item equals, and then you're explicitly saying what's in that map versus doing like coffee item equals the curly bracket and then doing coffee item dot name equals coffee item dot description.
Yeah, so if you have all the information available to you, then people typically would do it this way. Like they wouldn't do like just comment this out. Like an empty array and then coffee item dot name equals coffee. They wouldn't, yeah, so if like, if you know the name, like obviously you're writing the code, and so you know the name, description, and the price at this point, like at this moment, I know those things. And so I,
Have that inside before each of them come through, I guess. Adding them. Well. You'd add it to them, but.
well, I mean, this is kind of, so in like the real world, like if we had a coffee shop and we had menu items, like that would probably be in like a database or something. Like it would be in a like a system that you can add and remove and change, right? And so like all the coffee item, like all the items in the shop would be kind of stored somewhere, and then there'd be some sort of interface for adding and changing them. And then we would, which we'll learn about this in a few modules, like we would actually like query and ask for the current items in the
So
menu.
you keep it like this, except instead of the string coffee, you're just pulling in that data from the database.
Yeah, but the format that the data comes in from the database is literally like when you have it, like once you get it. Like it will literally be an array of objects. Like when you get it back, like, so we would have some sort of like const menu items equals some function we define that's like get all items in shop, and like that function would query, like do all this, a bunch of stuff. It would query the database, get the items, and return them as an array of objects.
That's if you want the object to match, instead of like looping through and creating a different particular object. Putting in that information, like if you wanted like if you get name, description, price from the database.
Mhm.
And you want to maybe look through all the items in the database, but you want to add. Or like. Maybe only pull in like the name and description from that database, but have like different information. Within your object, if you wanted to not include prices.
Then you just like wouldn't ask for it from the database. Like whenever you are getting, sorry, it's kind of an aside, but whenever you're like getting data from somewhere, like you're just gonna get it in the format that you would need, like all at once, basically. You wouldn't then like loop through and change it necessarily.
Cause
I'm
I
not-
work with. Yeah, I just work with APIs and stuff, and like, we'll take data from here. We'll pull that data, put it into a map,
Mhm.
and then. Update the other information with the different. So we're just looking through all,
Mm. Yeah,
so, but, yeah, anyways, sorry.
no, it's okay. Yeah, sorry if that may not have made sense to everybody, but yeah, like essentially, you're not typically going to be defining all this stuff in your code like this. When you're building like a blog site, or you're building like a coffee shop that has menu items, you're not going to be like hard coding in the code all the menu items. You know, they're going to be coming from somewhere, from some system that is storing all of them, which is like a database. And so you'll receive them at some point in your code, but the way that it will be represented, like the way that you work with it, will be this format. It's almost like you did do this. Like, so you will receive all this stuff as an array of objects and manage it the same way as if we did this. Okay, that's enough mind-blowing and confusing things for today. Thank you all. And then looping is kind of the last really challenging thing to learn from this class. And then this example, after you've learned that, we can get really nice and clean. And then you guys will have a day to kind of soak all of that in without having to learn anything new. And then hopefully put it all together on your own for the last day. So cool. Have a good rest of your weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, see ya.